The glass doors of the hospital swung open with a loud crash as a woman burst inside, her breath ragged, her face drenched in sweat and panic. She clutched a tiny, unmoving baby in her arms, her fingers trembling as she held the child close to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the desperation in her voice as she cried out, "Please, somebody help me. My baby, he's not breathing." The few people sitting in the waiting area froze, turning to look at the woman. A nurse behind the reception desk gasped, immediately pushing a button to alert the emergency team. The woman, barely able to stand, stumbled forward, her legs buckling beneath her. Within seconds, the sound of rushed footsteps echoed through the sterile white halls as doctors and nurses raced toward her. Dr. James Carter, a seasoned physician known for his calm under pressure, reached her first. His sharp eyes darted to the small bundle in her arms. He had seen panic before, had heard desperate cries like this many times in his career. But something about this woman's terror sent a shiver down his spine. He didn't waste a second. "Give him to me," he said firmly, reaching for the baby. The woman hesitated for the briefest moment, clutching the child tighter, as if afraid to let go. But when she saw the determination in Dr. Carter's eyes, she surrendered her baby into his hands, her knees finally giving out as she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Dr. Carter laid the infant on a nearby gurney, his hands moving swiftly, expertly. The baby's face was pale, his tiny lips tinged blue. No movement, no sound, no breath. His heart pounded as he pressed 2 fingers against the baby's chest, feeling for any sign of life. "Code Blue, infant resuscitation," he shouted, his voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room. A team of nurses and another doctor rushed in, their faces set with grim determination. One nurse grabbed an oxygen mask, while another prepared emergency medications. The air was thick with urgency. The mother, watching helplessly from the floor, clutched her chest as if trying to hold herself together. "Please." "He was fine this morning," she whispered, shaking her head, her words broken by sobs. "He was smiling, laughing. Then suddenly, he just stopped breathing." Dr. Carter barely heard her, as his focus remained on the fragile life before him. He placed 2 fingers on the baby's tiny sternum and began gentle compressions. 1, 2, 3. His mind raced, calculating, hoping. Time was slipping away too fast. He had to act quickly. The nurses moved in sync, their hands practiced and steady, but even they stole worried glances at each other. A minute passed, 2. Every second felt like an eternity. "Come on, little guy," Dr. Carter murmured under his breath, his voice filled with determination. "Stay with us." The room was silent, except for the beeping machines and the mother's soft, choked sobs. Then suddenly, a small weak gasp, the tiniest movement, a flutter of lashes. The baby let out a faint, struggling cry. It was barely a sound, but in that moment, it was the loudest, most powerful thing in the world. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, but Dr. Carter wasn't done yet. "We need to stabilize him," he ordered. "Get him to the NICU." The mother let out a wail of relief, her hands covering her face, as tears of gratitude mixed with the fear still lingering in her eyes. But even as the team wheeled the baby away, Dr. Carter couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something wasn't right. Healthy babies don't just stop breathing. Not like this. And the look in the mother's eyes. It wasn't just panic. It was something else. Something deeper. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on. But he would soon find out. And when he did, it would change everything. Dr. Carter stood at the nurse's station, staring at the monitor where the baby's vitals flickered steadily now. The infant, barely clinging to life minutes ago, was stable but still fragile. Something about this case gnawed at him. He had seen respiratory failure in newborns before, illness, premature birth, even accidental suffocation. But this felt different. The baby had no signs of infection, no fever, no explanation for what had just happened. He glanced toward the woman sitting on the waiting room bench, hugging herself as if trying to hold her world together. Her long dark hair stuck to her damp face, her body shuddering from silent cries. A nurse had given her a blanket, but she clutched it without noticing. Her eyes, red and swollen, stayed fixed on the door where her child had been wheeled away. "Doctor," Carter exhaled and walked toward her. He had questions, and something told him she had answers, whether she knew it or not. "Ma'am," he said gently, crouching in front of her. "Your baby is stable for now, but I need to ask you some things. Can you tell me what happened before you got here?" The woman looked at him, her lips trembling. She swallowed hard, as if struggling to find her voice. I don't know," she whispered. "He was fine this morning, laughing, playing. I fed him, changed him. Then he just went limp in my arms. His face, his lips turned blue. I thought..." Her voice broke, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Dr. Carter nodded, his mind processing her words carefully. "Has he been sick recently? Any signs of trouble breathing before today?" She shook her head violently. "No, nothing. He was perfectly healthy. I don't understand. What happened to him?" He hesitated before asking the next question. "Has anyone else been around him in the last 24 hours? Did he fall? Inhale anything unusual?" For the briefest second, something flickered across the woman's face. Something almost imperceptible. Fear, hesitation, guilt. But just as quickly as it appeared, she buried her face in her hands and shook her head again. "No, no one. Just me." Dr. Carter studied her, his instincts telling him there was more to this story. But before he could press further, the doors to the NICU swung open, and a nurse rushed toward him. "Doctor, you need to see this." He stood up immediately, his stomach twisting. The nurse's face was tense, her expression unreadable. Without another word, he turned and followed her down the hallway, leaving the woman behind. Inside the yard, NICU, the baby lay in the incubator, tiny wires attached to his chest. His breathing had improved, but his oxygen levels were still unstable. Another doctor stood beside the bed, holding a small vial. "We ran a tox screen," she said in a low voice. "You need to see the results." Dr. Carter took the file and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the words, and his entire body went still. His pulse pounded in his ears. A foreign substance had been found in the baby's system, something that had no business being in a newborn's body. He looked up at his colleague, his voice low and controlled. "How did this get into him?" The other doctor shook her head. "I don't know, but it wasn't accidental." Dr. Carter's mind raced. Had the mother known? Had she done something? Or was she protecting someone? His gut told him she wasn't lying about her fear. But was she hiding something? He turned, his heart hammering, as he made his way back to the waiting room. The woman was still there, but this time, she wasn't alone. A man had appeared beside her, his posture stiff, his face unreadable. He was speaking to her in hushed tones, his fingers digging into her arm as if warning her. The woman's eyes darted up and met Dr. Carter's, wide and filled with something he recognized instantly: terror. And in that moment, he knew she was in danger, and so was her baby. "Doctor." Carter's steps slowed as he watched the interaction between the woman and the man beside her. The tension between them was thick, almost suffocating. The man leaned in, whispering something, his grip tightening around her arm. Her face was pale, her body stiff. She wasn't just afraid. She was trapped. The moment she saw Dr. Carter approaching, her eyes silently pleaded with him. He didn't look away. He had seen enough over the years to recognize fear when it was staring him in the face. He had been right. There was more to this story. Clearing his throat, he stopped just a few feet away. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you privately," he said, keeping his voice calm but firm. His gaze flickered to the man. "You can wait. Here." The man turned, his expression unreadable, but his jaw clenched slightly. "She doesn't need to go anywhere. I'll answer any questions you have." Dr. Carter held his ground. "It's about her baby," he said, emphasizing each word carefully. "I need to speak to her alone." For a moment, the man didn't move. Then, slowly, he let go of the woman's arm. "Fine, but make it quick," he muttered, stepping back. The woman hesitated before standing up, her hands gripping the blanket around her shoulders, as if it were the only thing keeping her together. Dr. Carter led her a few steps away, just out of earshot. She swallowed hard, looking down at the floor. "Is my baby okay?" she whispered. "He's stable," Dr. Carter said, "but we ran tests. There was something in his system, something that shouldn't be there." She stiffened, her breath catching. He watched her closely. "I need to know the truth. Did someone hurt your baby?" Her lip trembled, and for a long moment she didn't speak. Then, in the faintest voice, she whispered, "I didn't know. I didn't know what he was doing." Dr. Carter's stomach sank. "Who?" She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes darting toward the man who was watching them closely. She turned back, gripping his sleeve. "Please, you have to help us," she choked out. "He's not my husband. I thought he loved us, but he's dangerous." Her voice cracked. "He's been giving my baby something. I don't know what. He told me it was just medicine, that it was supposed to help him sleep better. But today, my baby stopped breathing. I knew something was wrong." Dr. Carter exhaled sharply. He had suspected foul play, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "We need to report this. We need to get you both somewhere safe." She shook her head wildly, panic flashing in her eyes. "He'll know if he finds out I told you." Just then, the man took a step forward. "Everything okay?" he called, his voice tight. Dr. Carter turned, schooling his expression. "Just answering a few more medical questions," he said, smoothly. But inside, his mind was racing. He needed to act fast. Taking a deep breath, he reached into his coat pocket and discreetly pressed a button on the hospital's emergency alert system. Security would be here in less than a minute. The woman noticed and gripped his wrist. "Please," she whispered, "just save my baby." The doors to the NICU swung open, and 2 security guards stepped in. The man immediately tensed. "What's going on?" Dr. Carter stood his ground. "Sir, I need to ask you to stay here." For a moment, the man's eyes darkened. "Why?" His voice was sharp, suspicious. One of the security guards stepped forward. "We just have a few questions. Please, come with us." The tension in the room thickened. For a second, Dr. Carter thought the man might try to run, but then the guard stepped closer, and he knew he had no choice. With a final glare at the woman, he turned and followed them out. The moment he was gone, she let out a sob, covering her mouth with both hands. Dr. Carter gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said, "and so is your baby." Tears streamed down her face. But this time, they weren't just from fear. They were from relief. Hours later, after the police arrived and the man was taken into custody, Dr. Carter stood by the NICU, watching as the woman sat beside her baby, holding his tiny hand. The child was still weak, but his breathing was steady, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. She looked up at Dr. Carter, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us." Dr. Carter gave her a small nod. "You saved him," he said gently. "You found the courage to fight for him. That's what matters." As he stepped back, watching the mother and child reunited, he felt something deep in his chest, something that reminded him why he had become a doctor in the first place. Some lives were saved in the operating room, others with the right words, at the right time, and sometimes the most important thing a doctor could do was simply listen.